What's up, everybody? It's your boy C-Life and KWebb, and we're here again on the MasterMinds Podcast. We have a really good show for you today. We're going to have a really strong and hopefully helpful discussion about the Constitution and whether or not we should have a constitutional convention and some things that may need to change in United States law. So we have a good conversation for you today. What I'm gonna ask you to do is just go ahead and click that like button, like, subscribe, and even share, just to help us out. That's the best way to support us, just to get that algorithm up on Google and YouTube and all that good internet stuff. So let's get into it.
Yes, sir.
I've I think I know that you have some pretty strong views on the Constitution and possible changes and things like that. But before we get into that deep conversation, I want to just raise this question. What is a constitutional convention? What is it?
All right. So, in short, the Constitutional Convention of the States is when the state legislatures, those who are in the House and Senate in the states, they apply to the United States Congress to
Hmm.
call a constitutional convention for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Um,
Okay.
it's a multi-part process, but the thing that we are talking about is members of each state in the legislature saying, "Hey, we think that we have some amendments that should go onto the Constitution, and we want to kind of help you along the way by starting this process."
And so has has this happened before in the past? Is it something happening currently where you're suggesting that there needs to be a convention? What really is stimulating your desire to want to have this sort of conversation?
The thing that's stimulating my desire is the total ineptitude of our national legislative body, the gridlock in Congress, the lies and the mistruths intentionally that comes out, the ineffective nature of that body
Hmm.
um, would lend itself to some change, and not seeing any difference, any real um, demonstrable difference in the people, the players who rotate in and out. They need some help from those we the people, right? The people in the states. So has it ever happened before? No. A None of the amendments to the United States Constitution that have ever passed have come from this process where the states collectively said, "Hey, we want to send these amendments." Most of them came from Congress itself, two-thirds of Congress
Yeah.
deciding, "Hey, we should do this thing." But
So
the
hold on,
frame,
before we go further, let's
okay,
talk about that. Let's talk about that because this precedent is in Article 5 of the US Constitution,
yes,
right?
the
So why is it, and we may not have the answer to this, but why hasn't this happened before?
well,
Why
I think
wasn't a convention like this called before to make amendments?
so. I think in my research there were a couple times where states threatened to start the petition to call a constitutional convention, and that prompted Congress to move on the issues that were going to be brought up. So I think
Hmm.
Congress preemptively decided, "Hey, it's better that we go ahead and put this up on the floor before the states do," because there's some debate as to whether or not you could limit the scope of the Constitutional Convention if you call it. And so instead of having things get out of hand by having these states say, "Yes, we need to do this," Congress went
Hmm.
ahead and did the amendments. Um, but it's
So as opposed to a sort of amendment done by Congress, if the states called a constitutional convention, they could theoretically talk about all of the articles of the Constitution. Is that what you're saying? Like
so
there's no scope or limitation as to what they can consider and talk about in a constitutional convention. Is
I
that what you're
think that
suggesting?
I think that's going to be largely dependent on how the states do their resolutions. I'm Nebraska and Wisconsin were two states that recently, earlier this year, adopted resolutions to do that, and Wisconsin's is pretty explicit in what it's called to do, relating to the Convention of the States of one or more constitutional amendments restraining the abuses of power by the federal government, um, uh, bringing in improper and imprudent spending. Um, so basically limiting. So this constitution, this state's resolution spelled out in the resolution, this is what we are trying to call a constitutional convention for. I
Hmm.
don't know that all of them will be that specific or explicit. And so there was some disagreement about whether you could limit what would be on the agenda if such a thing if such a thing comes to pass. But since it hasn't happened, there's no precedent to go by whether it'll be limited in scope or if it could be anything.
Wow, wow, wow. Well, this is it's definitely interesting. Um, what do you see? We didn't get to the second half of my original question, which was there any specific thing that you wanted to kind of bring up that would say to you, "Hey, we really need to do this," and or we really need to think about what it would look like
Yeah,
for
so
states to convene?
it's interesting. About 10 years ago, I was having a conversation with one of my brothers about rewriting the Constitution, and he had some choice words for me when I said it to him. But even back then, 2010, 2011, 2012, seeing the way that things were happening or not happening in the wake of President Obama being elected and winning his second term, and just how things seem to get progressively worse quickly. It's
Hmm.
like, okay, what tools do we have to address this challenge? Because if we continue in this way, it's only going to get worse. And lo and behold, it's only gotten worse. Um, Now with the super conservative super majority on the Supreme Court, and the, some of their rulings seeming to going back to undo certain precedents,
Hmm.
um, it's like, okay, really nothing is safe, because when they interpret the Constitution, it's sort of a badge of glory for them to say that we interpret it as textualist and originalist. What the original words of the Constitution says is basically our foundation for what we go off of. Well, if we do that, then people like you and I were not considered equal humans with any rights. And so if we default to an originalist view of the Constitution, that's problematic for so many reasons. Um, and so I believe that now, because we have seen failures in each and every part of government, because we've seen corruption in pretty much most of the elected officials, I think there's enough frustration, anger, groundswell now to where you may be able to convince the required 34 states to adopt legislation to do this, to start this process.
Wow. So let me ask you this: what would that mean? What are some of
Mm-hmm.
the problems that such a identity shaking
Mm-hmm.
event would cause, right? Because when you think about the Constitution, it's a formative document, and some may argue that although there have been some people erased in its origin, it shows the strength of the frame, that it can be amended, and certain things that started out wrong can be righted while still holding true to the document itself. What are your thoughts on that?
So to answer your first part of the question, that would be opening Pandora's box. I will admit and concede that if it got to a point to where there was a constitutional convention of the states that were called, there's a whole array of possibilities and outcomes, and all of them are not good.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I will say though that if we look at this objectively, we can see the reason in maintaining the frame that has held while also acknowledging the need to update and modernize to keep up with, right?
Hmm.
Um, our Constitution probably still in its bones, in its DNA, see a bifurcated world of the property owners and those who don't have. Amendments have been made to say yes, you can be included, but at its core, the words, the articles, they were written in with that in mind. And
Hmm.
so I think that there's a way, and I know I said 10 years ago, I told my brother we should rewrite the Constitution. And I still mean that. I really do. But I think there are things worth holding on to that are foundational, that will help maintain some identity. But then there's some areas that require more definition, more fleshing out, or clarification about what this means practically in the 21st, 22nd, 25th century. I think not doing the work of updating is detrimental to life as an American.
Hmm.
Let me ask you this: Do you think that um, our our function and form of government, the way that it functions and the form that it takes, that it is the most expedient and effective form?
I'm gonna need you to flesh that out a little bit. Try
Okay,
to tailor that question just focus
a
it a
little
little
bit.
bit so I can understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, is it the way that we elect our representatives, who may or may not represent us, the fact
Hmm.
that they are campaigning for at least half of the time in office, that many of them seem more beholden to not the average everyday citizen, but to some special interest. That that form and function, is that the ideal way to do what needs to be done?
Um, I wouldn't say that it's the ideal way. This is what I would say. Okay, when you have to work 40 hours a week,
Mm-hmm,
when 40 hours of your week are devoted to some sort of job.
mm-hmm,
Okay, and then you have a spouse, children, other responsibilities. Um, your work environment is stressful, so you do things to wind down. This all of these things, as great as they are, continue to take away your attention from some of the other things that are going on more societally. And so when you talk about um, the representation of the everyday um, American, I think that's hard to talk about because so many of us just with work and outside of work are so distracted by all the other things. You know, you have people in certain cities that it takes them an hour and a half after work just to get home. It has nothing to do with, just maybe everyday maintenance. Maybe you want to go to the gym or you want to stretch your legs because you've been sitting at a desk all day, or all the different things that come along with just living in society. It's not like you can go to a central place and really learn what's going on in the world. uh, One would say, maybe there's no such thing as objective news, right? But you can't even go to a central place to get all of the facts honestly revealed to you, right? So you have to kind of in order to stay abreast of what's going on in Washington, what's going on in Congress, what's going on in the state, there's so much extra work that American citizens have to do after being overworked. Now, I'm just talking about at that point, I'm assuming a middle class kind of comfortable lifestyle. Let's add some other things to it. What happens if when that 40 hours a week don't pay your bills? The stress that adds on to it. What happens when you have to choose between both both partners making enough money for everyone to eat and be comfortable, or um, taking care of a new child or something like that? I don't know. The list goes on really long. I could probably come up with many different things as to the ways in which one is distracted. I didn't add Netflix. I didn't add all of the thousands nowadays of channels watching TV that numb your brain. I didn't add anything that you might be wanting to do to learn as far as investments, learning new things that you can do around your living quarters, learning new ways of making multiple streams of revenue. I didn't talk about any of that. And so the list is almost infinite at the amount of distractions that kind of take you away from the social order in being in structuring and framing society. So I want to make sure that that at least is in the conversation, even if it's just kind of dumped there. With that, how much how much can an everyday American be
Add to the
in some of the
conversation.
decision making processes, right? And this is sort of why we elect representatives. But then also, if I'm electing a representative, I'm in within there needs to be a vote, and that's the democratic element of our structure. It's the representative of my state may not actually represent my views because I may have lost in the voting process in my state. So I may not have the sorts of representation that I would like. But then the other thing is, how many people really know who represents them? And that's it. That's just another. How many people really know how the different branches of government work or are supposed to work together? How many people really know the difference between a Democrat, a Republican, and a Libertarian or an Independent? How many people really know these differences, and how much of how so the question of whether or not it's ideal or whether or not it's working is one question. Another question is why it is or isn't working. It's part of the reason why it's decaying and not working is because we, the American people, are not actively involved politically based on the piling of distraction that is shifted as the country has gone through time, right? When when you don't have to worry about whether or not um, one salary can feed a family and can provide for a family regardless of who it is working. When you live in a society where you can own your home and you can stay and build roots in a particular location instead of kind of ping ponging jobs just to find a place, just to get to that place where you can live comfortably, right? That that adds a different amount of stress. When you're living in a food desert and you have to travel miles just to get fresh food, that adds something to the stress of just your everyday life. And stress is going to cloud your judgment. Stress is going to cloud your brain. It's going to make you prioritize in sort of a Maslow hierarchy of needs, so to speak. It's like, how much time and effort can I put into a society if all of my time and effort goes into the well-being of
Survival.
myself
Yeah.
and just trying to progress in life, not even to where I'm trying to live lavishly, but where I could just afford to own my immediate dwelling, right? Or I can afford to not be in mountains of debt because I wanted to get an education. Or I can my rent doesn't make it to where I have to choose between rent or pay my phone bill on time, or rent or have enough groceries, or so.
So are you saying that because we have all of these distractions, it almost needs to be the way that it is, a representative form, because people don't have the bandwidth after dealing with life and situations to really inform themselves enough and engage intelligibly?
Well, I'm saying that, but I'm not saying that it needs to be that way. I'm saying that it's hard to gauge how effective the system of operations is, because so many people cannot engage in the ways that it's supposed to be engaged even now. Like, how many people can know how to send a letter to their senator, or know where the mayor's office is and the governor, know the chief of police of, where they live? How many people know who these people are, know how to access them, know where to go and who to go to for what, right? So that's just basic political involvement, and that's a lot of that stuff is not going to be taught before you turn 18.
Yeah, those basic civics lessons of the branches of government, the representatives, all of those things. Yeah, they
You
aren't.
might have taught me of how that worked, right? And you may have taught me structurally what that means. But if I don't know the different people in the offices and
Yeah.
um my local resident, if I don't know who I need to speak to for what, I don't know, for example, where the Department of Sanitation is, or
Hmm.
who even works there, or what the proper avenues would be for me to, I don't know, get a new trash can, or if
Hmm.
I need something else picked up, or if I need to, just like basic things, right? Then you tell me at 18 I can start voting, but I haven't really learned all these people in school. I haven't really learned kind of how to maneuver politically, just locally, let alone federally, just in my state, in my town, in my suburb, wherever I live. I don't really know who to speak to or where to go, and you know what the police department does, and what the state troopers do, and what the sheriff department does, and where their jurisdiction lies, and I don't know any of that stuff, right? And not I'm not saying that we need to know everything, but we need to at least know where to go to find out the information. So I'm saying that it's hard to gauge whether or not the flaws with the system, or just kind of some of the other things that make it difficult to properly engage said system. And I think that when you talk about the Constitution, when you talk about some of our laws, contextually, life has greatly changed. It's changed tremendously.
Right.
Some would say for the better, some would say for the worse. There's better, and there's some things that are better, some things that might be a little bit worse. One of the things, though, that I would say is highly problematic is, at the age I'm able to be politically involved, is also the age where my brain isn't fully developed. I'm 18 years old, but I'm also having to make all these new decisions about my life that I haven't had to make. And it's like, now this is the number of decision making. Now I got to do all of this stuff at 18. I got to try to figure out what I'm going to do for a living. And in some cases, I'm somewhat persuaded by society that if I don't go to college,
I'm not
I won't
successful.
be, I'm not successful, or I won't be able to make a living, or I won't be able um, to work enough to make ends meet, right? And then we'll say things like, "Oh, you're going to end up being a burger flipper at McDonald's or a Walmart greeter." Do we not need people to flip burgers at McDonald's, right? We do. I like me some hot French fries with some salt on them things. Who don't like McDonald's fries? Come on, right?
Listen,
Do we not need someone to help us find things in whatever grocery store we're going to stock shelves,
yeah.
to make sure that the food is fresh, right? So we've kind of made certain things that we need in society not important, even though they're very important for things to work and for things to flow. How many people who work on Wall Street go to Starbucks to get their coffee?
A lot of
How many people go to a coffee shop to do tech jobs and to check emails and to just kind of chill there and meet have business meetings at these different places, and we look at the people that are kind of making Starbucks work and making local eateries work and making restaurants work as less than in our society. And we make it that way because they don't earn a living wage.
right.
Right. So you can't at 18 say, I don't really know what I want to do yet. I don't really know how I want to invest myself yet. So I'm gonna be a waiter just until maybe I want to go in, maybe I want to become a cook, or maybe I want to own a restaurant one day, and I kind of just want to learn the ropes of what it means to be in this sort of fast-paced environment. I can't do that because I'm not getting paid. You're operating on a tip system. So if people don't want to tip me, then I don't have a lot of money. So then restaurants will then say, hey, you got to pay this price for a meal, but then you also got to tip the server because we're not going to pay the server. So how much is the restaurant actually getting? How much are you getting off of this meal that you're serving me? Right. So I've digressed a little bit, but my point is at 18 you're bombarded with all these different thoughts, all these different things that you have to do. So it kind of starts initially from you being distracted when it comes to your political involvement. You're immediately distracted. And the time that it takes from 18 to actually become stable at a job or good at a craft, you're talking about 5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 years, you're now getting to a place where you're making enough money to make ends meet, but you've already been distracted that entire time. And so, unless something happens to your people group, or something happens that wakes you up, this whole time you're just trying to live your life. And so maybe you're voting, but maybe you're a one issue voter, not because you wouldn't like to be more informed, but because you just don't have the time. I don't have the time to be as informed as I would like to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just listening to the people that are around me, some of the people that I trust, the voting trends that um, my community have been taking. I'm trying to learn from here. I'm trying to learn from there. At the same time, I'm trying to live a good life. I'm trying to enjoy the life that I have. Right. So I think that all of these things play a factor into the question of whether or not the system is working. Is it something just wrong with how we've structured it, or could it also be that the majority of people cannot engage the structure to see where the cracks are, to see what things need to be changed, right? And to see if the people that we're electing are actually doing their jobs.
That was a lot, but it was
That was a
good.
lot. I went down a rabbit hole. I'm sorry about
It,
that.
it was good though, because it shows how all of this is tied together and connected, and in certain ways insidiously done, because it was designed this way. The political process was designed to exclude. Um, we can't have. That's why landowners were initially the only ones who could vote and participate, because
Mm,
these other people who don't have wealth, they don't have means, they don't know what it's like, so they don't need this decision making power.
yeah,
And so, me hearing you saying about the distractions here, there, and everywhere, in my head, it's like, yeah, because it was designed that way so that people who are open-minded and inquisitive won't engage, because then that causes problems. I have to answer questions about why I do this way, even though it makes no sense, right? Um, but I like your objection, though, that it's not, maybe it's not that the system is not appropriate or it doesn't work. It's just it's not functioning at its highest because people aren't engaged in a way to make it function that way.
But I like you bringing up that in some ways it's designed that way. Um, I think that as problematic as that may sound, that
It makes sense.
there is a certain luxury to wealth,
Oh, see,
and,
I wasn't gonna go
there,
there.
there's and what I mean by there's a certain luxury to wealth is, and we see this with even higher middle class families where you know mom and dad can drive you up to college and you got everything that you need and you don't have to worry too much about financial aid because the bills are paid. That's a different college experience than
Yeah,
someone who has to work a full-time job, try to retain what they're learning, and basically it's, if they don't pass this class, that could be the end for them, right?
yeah,
So that there is a sort of luxury to having the resource, and not being clouded by the kind of hustle and bustle of where you're going to get your next meal from or whether or not the lights are going to stay on. When you don't have to think about that, you have a lot of other space to do things,
hmm,
right? There is a luxury to having the internet, and what we saw when COVID hit is how much of a luxury it really was in some of these places where it was assumed everyone had the internet
yeah,
and they didn't. When we moved to where I'm at now in North Carolina, they were given hotspots. The school, the public school system was giving out hotspots because they realized that there were
his kids
a
are doing
good amount of kids that did not have access to an internet. And what they realized is those little hotspots wasn't going to cut it either, right? So then they had to move from you being face to face to the option of sending some curriculum to you and you just completing it and sending it back to them, because they recognize that, oh, okay, well, everyone doesn't have a computer, so now we got to try to get Chromebooks. Everyone doesn't have the internet, so now we have to try to get hotspots, right? And so there is a sort of time. There's time when it comes to luxury that you have. When you only have to work from 9 to 5 and all your stuff is straight, you're not working 12-hour shifts, delivering Amazon boxes, right? Because that's what a shift is, 12 hours of you delivering boxes. What are you going to do after 12 hours? What you're not going to do is come home and read some politician's um, plan for the next 4 years. You're not going to do that because you've
yeah,
been working. You've been doing hard labor for 12 hours. So that's just an example. If I don't have to do that, I don't have to exhaust my body in that way. I'm just doing a job that allows me to sit in the AC and take breaks here and there and get up and eat here and there and have good time with my coworkers. Then when I get home, I'm not completely exhausted. Maybe I could do some stuff. If I'm a business owner now, well, now I got more time. Maybe I can
mm,
go to the golf course, hang out with the mayor,
mm,
right? If I'm a stockbroker and I just know how to play the stock market, maybe I only got to work 3 to 4 hours a day. I got the whole rest of the day to myself. Now, if mommy and daddy did their finances right, if my parental situation was straight and they left me a great startup, now that's even more time. More time to what? To talk politics. More time to what? To read history. More time to what? To develop and to think through difficult things. And so now, who is more informed to vote would be the question. Someone who has to work 12-hour shifts, someone who has to literally physically work with their body all the time, or someone who gets to sit in the AC and doesn't really have to do anything.
So what you're saying is being politically aware and active is a luxury.
I'm saying it's a sort of luxury for generally speaking. Now there are some people who they're gonna work the 12-hour shift and then they're gonna go to town hall meeting because they know that if they don't show up to the town hall meeting, certain things not gonna get done for the community. There are some hard chargers who would devote their life regardless of whether they're making good money or whether they just getting by because they see the importance of political involvement. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about your average everyday
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about thinking about all the different distractions, all the things that get in the way for you making these decisions, and the luxury of not having those distractions. That is a luxury. If you don't ever have to think about. I mean, you ordering filet mignons and eating lobster dinners, and your belly's always full, and you don't have any calluses on your hands. You get manis and petties all day. Yeah, I mean, yeah, tons of luxuries. That's it.
Yeah.
For one, you can choose what you're going to put into your body and making sure that you're getting all your nutrients. That's just one simple thing. You're getting the premium foods. You juice. You got a juice store that you go to is $7, $8 for a little small thing of juice, right? That's filling your body with antioxidants and vitamins and nutrients, versus someone who is drinking a soda water, not even like a real soda, out the back of a bodega, just trying to get something to drink because they was working on the back of a sanitation truck and it's just a quick stop and they barely have a full lunch break. Right? That's it's gonna have different outcomes over time. It's
Got it.
gonna have different outcomes over time. So what all I'm saying is that um yeah, there are some structural issues in even though now we say it's more equitable, it's not because of all of the things that come with just trying to build a life and trying to make it in America.
Those barriers to entry, they're
Yeah.
still real and not just imagined. All right. So I know I invited you into my crazy world of thoughts about the Constitutional Convention of the States. Um, if I were to approach you and say, "Hey, I want to advocate for this thing," and let's say that you have some time to dedicate to it, and I were to
Mhm.
say, "Hey, this is the thing that I want us to start advocating for. Let's rewrite the Constitution." What? How would you respond to me?
My first response, if I'm being honest, would just be for what? And that's what I wanted to get to before I went down all these rabbit holes. Why? What? So for the sake of this not turning into a 2-3 hour event, okay? Name one reason or one thing that you would change. One reason why it needs to change, or one thing you would change in the Constitution.
One thing that I would change is somehow having a designated body of the American populace to be able to push legislation to where Congress would have to act on something that this group decides on, because there are times where the American people polling will say it's 80% this, and Congress was like, nope, that's not going to happen. I
Hmm.
think there needs to be some mechanism to where we are allowed to have some say in what Congress debates, votes on, acts upon. That's one of the bigger things that I would do.
So, based on some of the other things that we talked about, in just how the political process is now, and some of the blockades to involvement, how would you mitigate some of those blockades in a situation like that, where the American people did have more say on what was going on in Congress?
Mitigating some of those blockades, I would say it's going to require a um, a concerted effort to make sure that people somehow get engaged, informed, even with a 12-hour shift or what have you, whether it's you're part of somebody in your family or somebody in a group or even your faith community, somebody is giving you the things that are going on high level so that if you want to search for more, you know where to start and it's not just out in the sea of what have you. I would also really work to try to have civics as part of any elementary, middle, high school program, so that when you come out of high school, you have some understanding of how to
Yeah.
be a productive citizen, those types of things. It's, I don't know that there will be a way to legislate whether a new constitution or not or laws. The um, the amount of time that people can work because people choose when to work, how much they want to
Yeah.
work, or whatever. So I don't know about making more time in their day, but making information more accessible, I think then helps people to recognize that this hamster wheel that I'm on, if I advocate, talk to enough people and get enough people to vote on a referendum, maybe there is some limitations that can be imposed that would make my situation better. Just sharing with people what the tools are, I think would be the ways to get around those blockades.
Hmm. That's good. That's good. Now let me ask you this: in changing the Constitution, right? Um, what would inform the law that you're making? And let me frame the question a little bit, because there's some people that believe that this country was founded on Christian principles. Whatever you stand on that is that's not, we don't want to go there. But there are
Right.
some people that will make the argument, and there are some principles
That are Christ-like.
that are informed by at least the Bible. Even if we don't want to say, this is Christian all the way, there are certain things that are informed by the Bible, such as witnessing witnesses in court, the number of witnesses that constitute a position in court, for example. That is biblically informed. You know, so there are some things that what would inform this new constitution in such an American climate where it's hard to find a agreed upon truth. An American environment where there's a your truth and there's a my truth and there's a everybody's truth.
So here's where I'll go with that. I don't know that I 100% agree that it's hard to find people who would agree with truth. I think what happens in sort of one of the episodes that we talked about is the media.
Hmm.
People write things for clicks, for likes, those types of things. And so I have to amplify those things that divide because that's what sells, right?
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
I believe that if you got reasonable people together, they would find truth in areas of uh, restraining government, being fair to the population, the roles and responsibilities of Congress. I think you can find a lot of agreement around those big areas. Issues like abortion or gay marriage or taxes and stuff like that, I don't know that you will get that there. But as far as is Congress being effective and ways to hold them accountable, I think you can find some agreement there. I think with the with income inequality and those types of, like, the way that the system is structured, favored for one group, I think you'll have enough people who can say, all right, there's something, I love profits as much as anybody, but this is absurd. I think you can find that easier than it may seem.
Well, let's take just one example.
Okay.
Maybe this will help to elucidate. some of the difficulties in finding an agreed upon truth. Freedom of speech.
Hmm.
Freedom of speech. There are certain things that you cannot say. That, for example, yelling bomb in um, a movie theater. This is just an argument that I've heard. Okay, I'm not going to say that I agree with it. I think there's some problems with it, but some people will say, well, that's an example of, we agree that you shouldn't just be able to say whatever you want, but then there is now a push for things like verbal violence, and a good example will be the pronoun debate, right? Where there's some people that say, I'm going to use the pronouns that I see. I'm not gonna call he, she, because he wants me to, right?
Okay.
That's what, and the debate was, this is a violation of my freedom of speech. You can't tell me what I can say or what I cannot say. And the other side was saying, well, this what you're doing is verbal violence. It's a disrespect of, how somebody wants to be perceived in the world, and this can lead um, to furthering depressed states of different people groups, and even in the worst case scenarios, could be one of the many reasons why someone decides to take their life. It's a perfect example. Freedom of speech. What do you do with it?
I think
There's
you.
not there's not a clear truth, because one side wants to say I should be able to say whatever I want. The other side wants to say, well, when you say what you saying that you want, you have to consider the welfare of another person.
I don't. Okay, as a human, I can understand that. I don't know that you can legislate that, right? I am responsible for me. I control my actions. I cannot forcibly cause anyone to do anything against their will, because that would be a violation of their sovereignty, their humanity.
But see, now you're toting the
Slippery
line
slope.
here. You're toting the line here. The reason why you're toting the line is because this was actually something that was happening, right? Where they were saying, no, you can't say this. Like, you have to call people by their pronouns. That's what you have to do, or your job is on the line, or
So
it's
then,
and that wasn't necessarily state, but institutionally, this was something that was going on.
and so then I think that is, in a perverse way, that is not bad that institutions are being called upon to actually take a stand on where you draw the line. Um, if if I'm going to complain that you not calling me pronouns that I now ascribe to, that you're doing verbal violence to me, then by forcing me, compelling me against my will to call you something that I don't want to, is that not you? Is that not you doing verbal violence to me? Right? It's a so I don't see that anyone can make a freedom of speech argument that says Carson has to call me what I want Carson to call me, or else he violated my. It just, it blows my mind. It baffles me how that can be a thing. I can understand
But it
people saying
is
it's
a thing,
disrespectful.
though. It is a thing, and
Yes.
it being a thing, when rewriting a constitution,
Hmm.
may be
But
more of a thing.
okay, so that's the slippery
It's
slope of
potentially,
opening
that's what
up.
I'm saying. By
Are
opening
you
up
going
to
to have to
say,
define freedom of speech
are
more
you
to
are you gonna
actually
have
adjudicate this?
to say what, in this, thought experiment, would opening up the Constitution, uh people say no, we don't want freedom of speech there. No, you actually don't need freedom of speech. Or there are certain contexts in which you can exercise your freedom of speech. But what we mean by exercising your freedom of speech is
But so
um, not being verbally violent in your exercise of freedom of speech, right? So there's is I'm not saying that freedom of speech will be tossed out, but what freedom of speech is and the parameters of it is something that I don't know if the American people agree on now.
so and I hear you, and I'm with you. I totally get it. But I also at the same time think that going through those exercises, at least at a certain clip, like after a certain number of years, I don't think is a bad thing. I think
Mm,
we should be wrestling with what does this mean in our context? What does this mean to this person and this other person? I don't think we should shy away from it because it's going to be difficult, because I think that's what actually will bring about the most commonality is us trying to define what this means. And I think also part of the reason that I believe it could be a successful, if not a difficult process, is that people, in the way that I see it, people will be included in it this time.
mm,
Not just a certain number of people making decrees for others, but there
for
will need
everybody.
to be some type of input from everybody who is going to be governed by this so that they can say, yes, I see my fingerprint in that, in this provision, in this clause, in this statement.
Okay, I think this is a we're definitely gonna have to do a part two of this, right? Because in the part two of this, we need to delve deeper into the ways that what would be informing this
Yeah.
um, rewrite of the Constitution. Is it something that needs to happen like every 10 years, right? Do we need to re-envision what it may be? What are some of the cons if it is more reoccurring? Um, Another question that we can go into is just what the law is intended to do to a society, right? So uh, keep it locked for us next week to go into that. But what are some of your final thoughts and some of your final takeaways that you want to bring us into next week?
Um, the elitism of political operatives.
Hmm.
And although I wouldn't necessarily consider myself one, I guess in some ways that I am. And um, basically having you to really lay out the reality of most people, the majority of Americans who don't have the time or the bandwidth or the connections for these things. I think for me and for others who work in politics, we have to recognize how our ask of others to do certain things may not be because they don't want to. It might just
Yeah,
be because I'm so exhausted, and or you haven't told me what to do or how to do it, so I don't know, and then I just fall away. So it's just an awareness, a self-awareness that you have to meet people where they are.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
Um,
good. I think that I think that meeting people where they are is a good takeaway. We brought out some of the barriers to political involvement and kind of began to imagine what it would look like to challenge the Constitution on some places and to possibly even rewrite it. So, again, like, subscribe, share,
please
check
do.
back with us next week. And that's a wrap. That's all I got. Peace
Peace.
out.